Hey everybody, Steve Monday, Chief Forecaster for Rowan County Weather here. The sun is certainly out bright today, creating some very heavy light on the left side of my face here in terms of where we're getting ready to do our podcast today. We've got a great guest coming up for us, Cassie Clark, who does the Where the Dogwoods Bloom podcast and blog out in the eastern part of the state. Looking forward to having her on. But before we get started and welcome Cassie in, we did want to thank our advertising partner that helps make the Rowan County Weather Podcast possible. That's William Ryan Enterprises. Thank you to William Ryan and his team for advertising with us and making the podcast possible. And if you want more information on them, you can check out their store, William Ryan Flooring and Supplies. It's all part of their sister company located at 1600 North Main Street in China Grove. It's in the old Grove Supply building. For context, if you know where that is, you can stop by there and check out their store. You can dial the number you see here on your screen. And they also have the big announcement that came out yesterday that they're expanding their company to not only have William Ryan Enterprises, William Ryan Flooring and Supplies, but now they also have William Ryan, excuse me, let me say that 5 times real fast, William Ryan Roofing as well. So let's go ahead and welcome in Cassie to the podcast. But again, thank you to our advertising partner, William Ryan Enterprises, for making these podcasts possible. Hi, everybody. This is Steve Monday, Chief Forecaster with Rowan County Weather, with another episode of the Rowan County Weather Podcast. And we're being joined today by Cassie Clark. Cassie has a very awesome podcast that I've been listening to for a couple of months. She's out toward the eastern part of the state. But like with all the counties we have in North Carolina, all 100 of them, we're all one big happy family and neighbors. And sometimes we have some scuffles along the way, but I've certainly enjoyed listening to Cassie's podcast. And Cassie, welcome. I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So for the folks that are watching, go ahead and tell them about your podcast and all that, and we'll kind of just take off from there.
Yeah, so Where the Dogwood Blooms started as a blog. And what really happened is I had been trying to find a blog from a local's perspective that talked about North Carolina. And there's not a lot of that out there. Most of the blogs that you find are lifestyle, or there are other people from different areas who discover North Carolina and then they show it to other newcomers. And that wasn't really what I wanted. So I created my own. And so I just started writing about my experiences growing up in the mountains and in Wilmington and living here in Fayetteville. And I went on a podcast. And at the end of the podcast, it was Melissa Vera, and she was like, you should really do this. This is a great topic. Like, you should make your own podcast. And so I sat on that for a couple of months, and then I was like, okay, maybe I can handle this. And so I just jumped in and I started having people come on and have people tell me about the history they know and their stories and what they're into. And then it started kind of blowing up on X a little bit. I get a whole lot of interaction over there. I mean, I don't have a lot of followers, but it's crazy how many people want to talk to me about growing up here in North Carolina. It really kind of brings everybody together. And so it's been a great experience.
Absolutely. And, sometimes it can be the topic can go either way. Some folks, they love the state of North Carolina. You and I both are obviously proud North Carolinians, and we love to be able to give back with our own ways here. There are other folks who may move here and fall in love with the state after they get here. And then there are some folks who are just never going to like this state. They've got their own pre-built determination about the state in general. And even if they move here, they're still not going to like it. But I've seen you in some conversations on X and you handle those with grace, but it's always interesting to see the perspectives that everyone has.
I try to handle them with grace, but I tell everybody all the time, never forget I'm half hillbilly and I grew up in trailer parks. And if you rub me wrong, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to put it out there for you. And I've had to do so a couple of times. But for the most part, I have really incredible followers. I really do. So I don't bump heads with too many people.
Right. Absolutely. Well, let's start out. So tell us your story. You grew up in Western North Carolina and then eventually headed east. But let's start off with Western North Carolina and your history there.
Oh man. So I'm in love with mountains. I tell everybody I identify more so with my hillbilly side than I do my coastal side. So growing up in the mountains, I lived in Canton, North Carolina with my grandparents. My great papa lived right next door, and we lived on a cattle farm. And so I literally lived like just this dream lifestyle for a lot of us. I mean, every day I went walking through the pasture to check on the cattle, and I got to play in the woods and play in the creek. And, it was just wonderful. I had this really thick Appalachian accent. And then I moved to the coast, and that for me was a huge, just like culture shock.
Sure.
And I got teased for my accent, and I lost it. And I wish I could go back and change that. I tell everybody all the time, I still hear Appalachian in my head,
Hmm.
even if it's not coming out of my mouth. And so when I go home, it comes back out.
Right.
Um, but Wilmington, I fell in love with there too. I mean, it's this beautiful little historic town. It's
Sure.
grown a lot. It's kind of starting to lose touch with its roots, but Wilmington was a huge change for me. And so then I got to experience, all the things that beach kids experience. And what's funny is though my attitude's very hillbilly, the way that I dress and behave is very coastal. Like you could
That's
get in
awesome.
my car right now and there's seashells in my car. I wear flip flops all year round. I have to have sunglasses on at all times. There's always a beach bag in my car ready to go to the beach, even though I haven't lived at the beach in years.
Absolutely. So Haywood County girl.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny when I made a facial expression when you said Canton, and the reason why is I know exactly where Canton is because I actually married a Haywood County girl myself. My wife actually is from Clyde, North Carolina.
That is awesome. That is so awesome. And I
Yeah.
guarantee you in some way her and I are related.
He may very well be. Her last name's Whitehead. Well, her maiden name was Whitehead, so I don't know if that one rings a bell for you or not. But her dad actually taught at Tuscola, and her mom taught at Pisgah.
I love that. That's where I still cheer for Pisgah. I have a Pisgah
Yeah.
sweatshirt in my dresser right now.
Yeah. So that was awesome. And when you said that, I was just immediately thought, man, there's some 6 degrees of separation right there. So you ended up what took you to the eastern part of the state?
So my parents separated when I was really little, and I lived with my grandparents until I was about 8. And then I moved with my mom. And so I I had constantly had ties on both sides of the state.
Right.
So even when I was in Canton, I would go visit my mom in Wilmington, and when I was in Wilmington, I still went home to Canton. And so it's I got to experience both cultures my entire childhood growing up, and it was great.
That's awesome. So controversial question right out of the gate, since you've got the experience, and I know this is always a controversial question, especially here in the state. From your own personal experience, because you've been on both sides, which barbecue is better, Eastern or Western?
All right, y'all. I like both.
Do you?
Everybody come at me. I like
Yeah.
both,
Yeah.
but I need whole hog. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I've spent most of my life in Eastern North Carolina. That's the barbecue I fell in love with. It's the
Right.
one that, and I'm gonna go to Lexington and check it out. Everybody keeps fussing at me. I need to go to Lexington and try some barbecue up there. But yeah, Eastern North Carolina barbecue is where it's at.
Oh yeah. Well, Lexington is where I grew up and spent most of my life. Really, first 25 years of my life was right there in Lexington. So, plenty of barbecue festivals for me. And it's kind of funny. I think back to the last one I went to, and it's just hilarious to think about now. This little known singer at the time was performing at the Lexington barbecue the last time I was there, who ultimately ended up growing up to become Taylor Swift.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and at the time, standing there watching that, going, "This, that's pretty neat. She's going to sing some country music, but what will she really end up being?" And now look at her. So,
That is hilarious. I
yeah,
can't imagine her being in North Carolina at a small festival singing. That's cool.
yeah, it was hilarious to see that because I'm sure that if the opportunity presented itself now, she probably would not come back to the barbecue festival. But then again, you never know.
Maybe one day.
Yeah, maybe you just never know. All right, so you went from Wilmington to Fayetteville. How'd you end up landing there?
So when I want to say right after high school, it was right after high school. I got my first apartment, And this crazy group of guys lived across the hall. And there was always music blaring, smoke coming out into the breezeway. Like it was just, they were so wild. And this is a great story. So I had a really nice car,
Mhm.
and I used to go outside and I would wash it. And one day I'm outside and I'm cleaning out my car and I'm washing my car, and there's whistling coming out of this apartment. And I'm like flipping them off and like, shut up, whatever. And for years, I thought that this was my husband's roommate.
Right.
And so eventually we all became friends, and that's how I met my husband. But um years later I found out that it was actually my husband who was listening out the window the whole time.
Doing the cat calls.
Oh yeah.
So obviously you ended up there. Idea came along. You started doing some writing. I know you love journalism and writing and things like that. I've seen that as part of your story, and it was interesting. You actually had a post on X I saw earlier today where you talk about how you used to kind of cuddle up with your grandmother and she'd read books to you and all that, and you fell in love with just writing at an early age. So obviously the dream kind of started there, I would assume.
Yes. So probably when I was before I even can really remember. So probably when I was two, Mama used to read, and she read a lot, and she would cuddle up on the couch and she would read. And I would climb up behind her and lay my head up on her hip, and she would read to me every day, and all the classics. She read me so many books I can't even list them all off. And I can remember being like, one day I'm going to turn into a writer. And I would tell her this, and she would be like, yes, you will, baby. You've got this. You can do this. And after my husband and I met, it was kind of fast. We got married and then we had kids, and so I never went to college, and but I was still always dreaming about being a writer. And so I started a blog probably when I was oh, 24, 25, and it was about genealogy because I'm a huge genealogy geek. And that did really well for what it was. I mean, it's a very tiny niche. And I ended up getting a job where I was working on a front end Magento site. And so basically, what that means is I would design the front end of a website that was for a vape company. And so I had to let go of that. And then I've always had really bad anxiety. I have PTSD. So I thought maybe I'll write about that because I was starting to get better and I wanted to share tips. Let me tell you, if you have anxiety, writing about anxiety is probably not the greatest idea. So I was like, yeah, no, I let that go pretty quickly. I mean, that lasted about 6 months. And then when I was looking for I was looking for more information on it was some historic site in North Carolina, and there was like nothing on it. And I was like, why is there nothing on this place? And so that's kind of what kicked it in. And I was like, okay. My daughters had made some like comments too that kind of bothered me. I get like a lot of the younger generation feel like they have no culture. And I was like, that's 100% not true. North
Right.
Carolina actually has a very rich culture. Like,
Absolutely.
and so that's, yeah. And so I started the blog. And then when the Carolina Journal reached out to me, it blew my mind because I
Yeah.
was like, wow, I mean, it's for the opinion column, but still, I mean, that's for me, that's a big deal. It's almost like a
Right.
dream come true.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's like I said, I've enjoyed listening to your podcast, and you do it's a great job. And we were talking beforehand, and there are a lot of interviews you do where it sounds more like a conversation than an interview, and that's the style I actually like to hear when I'm listening to something because it's less robotic in my opinion. And so I certainly really that was one of the things I appreciated about listening right away with your podcast and the folks you have on. And it's just been great listening to it, and you certainly have caught my attention because, like I said, one of the first things I saw, ironically enough, was about barbecue. I think you were rating like the top 10 barbecue places or something like that, and it was just neat seeing that. Of course, being from Lexington, the first thing I thought was, "Well, let me see if there's some Lexington barbecue on here anywhere." But it was a neat little read, and obviously great just to hear your thoughts on it. What would you say? When you started looking at the history of North Carolina, what would you say was the probably the most fascinating thing that jumped out to you that you did not know until you just started finding it in your research?
Well, honestly, because I mean, I grew up with my grandparents, so I've always been a history geek.
Right.
And it, I can't name one. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's
Yeah.
almost like everything about North Carolina fascinates
Right.
me. I mean, from the pirates to the
Mhm.
hillbillies, like there's so much here, and people just kind of gloss all of it over, which has
Right.
always kind of rubbed me wrong.
Mm.
There's North Carolina is a lot more unique than even the locals realize. And so I
Right.
think it's important to share that with everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I always kind of chuckle because the fact that we obviously the Venus flytrap originated from here, and that one always kind of cracks me up to think about the fact that you would never in your mind think the Venus flytrap came out of North Carolina.
Yeah, and it actually grows in a very small area
Right.
in southeastern North Carolina. And
Right.
it was actually, oh, I cannot remember his name, but it was like one of the first governors who lived in North Carolina. He lived in Brunswick Town, who discovered it and shared it with the world.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let me ask you this, and you may or may not be a fan of the show. You may have never watched it, but the series Outlander, have you ever checked that out?
I haven't. Everybody asks
Yeah.
me that. I have to watch it. I've been
You,
asked about that like 3 or 4 times on the podcast, and I still haven't sat down and watched it yet.
Yeah, you absolutely do because there's a few seasons in they end up making their way from obviously England and Scotland and all that. They get in a shipwreck and they wind up of all places the coast of North Carolina, and they make their way to I don't want to give too much of it away for the folks that haven't watched, including yourself, but they ultimately end up in Wilmington to start out, and then they make their way through the state, and this is the part that made me just kind of squeal with delight. They end up landing in Rowan County, which at the time was the pretty much took up almost all the western side of the state.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they built their home up on what was called Fraser's Ridge in the books, but it ends up ultimately being Grandfather Mountain in reality. And so it's kind of a neat little thing. I was just as you were talking about pirates and the hillbillies and all that, I'm thinking, if she's watched Outlander, she's probably loving some of that because you see all of that really through the seasons as Outlander progresses.
I love that. So
Yeah.
my husband is actually he's from Cumberland County. Everybody is always asking me, "Is your husband in the military?" No, he's not. He's actually from Cumberland County.
Right.
And if you know anything about Cumberland County, there is a very heavy Scottish influence here. They
Right.
came in through Wilmington and then they
Yep.
ended up settling here in what was Cross Creek at the time or Campbellton,
Yes.
which joined together to form Fayetteville. And
Yep.
so I've been, ever since I got married, I've been surrounded by a very Scottish influence.
That's hilarious because, and again, going back to Outlander, there Cross Creek is mentioned in Outlander, and his one of the main characters, his name is Jamie Fraser. His aunt has a plantation in Cross Creek in the show in the book. So that's hilarious.
Yep. Yeah. So his family has literally been here since, the Scottish started coming in the mid 1700s. Yeah.
That's awesome. So you said you're a big fan of genealogy. I am too. I'd love to look at, ancestry and all that kind of stuff, all those different, things you can get to check it out. Well, it's kind of interesting. I don't know your thoughts on it, but mine has been, there's always some really neat things to say and then all of a sudden, or see, and then all of a sudden you get to a certain part of your history and you go, whoa, how did we end up there? Have you found anything like that in your background?
Yeah, it makes me really sad. I'm descended from a lot of really, really rich folks, and all of our
Yeah.
money disappeared, and that bothers me. So I'm descended from Ebenezer Harker of Harker's Island.
Yeah.
He owned the entire island.
Right.
Um, so I have a lot of my ancestors, my mom's were Puritans. They ended up trickling down towards the south and ended up in the Outer Banks. She's also descended. My mom has a really cool history. I love my dad's is harder to research, but my mom's has been pretty easy. But she also had ancestors that came from Charleston and were some of the very first into Brunswick County. What else? Let's see. Oh, I'm related to George Washington. We
Oh, nice.
share a great great grandfather.
Hmm.
That's on my daddy's side. Yeah, I mean, once you get into it, it actually, I think that that kind of fueled my love for North Carolina history because
Right.
it brings it closer to home. And
Yeah.
so being like, wow, my family are some of the first ones into the Outer Banks. They're some of the
Hmm.
first ones into southeastern North Carolina. They were some of the first into western North Carolina. Also, for me, into the UREs. My mom's dad's family, he's descended from Quakers. They came down from Pennsylvania and settled in the UREs. In Seagrove. And so I'm actually related to the Owens family, the famous group of potters from
Yeah.
Seagrove. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, it's been interesting because I got into it myself, and just like you said, to see how your history really kind of unfolds, not only through the state, but it really makes you or helps you to understand just how small the world really is when you start to break it down to a level that minute. We ended up finding out. So my family, with the last name of Monday, uh, we didn't come anywhere from anywhere I thought that we would have. We ended up coming over from England. And of course, as we made our way in, we ended up coming in through the state of Virginia and then so slowly trickled down into North Carolina. But somewhere along the way, I had a grandfather who also, I share a grandfather with Abraham Lincoln. So it's kind of funny because I've talked to a lot of folks that go back and look at their genealogy and they find out in some way, shape, or form they have been related to either a president or a famous politician or whatever, or even someone, in history that you go, oh, that's pretty neat. So yeah, it's been fascinating to see it all unfold. But it certainly helped me to want to actually learn the history that goes along with it. And that's, I think, part of what kind of drew me to what you do, because, it's just neat to go back and see some of the things you talk about yesterday, I believe it was, or maybe even earlier in the week, your last or latest episode of your podcast, you were talking to a gentleman about different theories, and one of the theories was how the wild horses ended up out on the Outer Banks, and that's really cool. That's one of the things I love to go see, and I'm sure you have done that before out at Ocracoke. But is that one of the things you really like when you get out to Ocracoke, is just stand there and watch those horses for hours just live their
Yeah.
life?
So I haven't been since I was little. My
Yeah,
grandparents took me when I want to say I was about six, maybe
yeah,
seven. And it was the first time I ever been. And we did all of the big things. And the
yeah,
horses to me were
yeah.
my favorite part. I was actually saying on that podcast, I feel really guilty because I haven't taken my kids yet. So
Right.
that I'm trying to make that a goal for this summer, is to go spend some time in the Outer Banks and let them see
Yeah.
the horses and the lighthouses and, the whole 9 yards.
The weather over the past couple of years has made that part of the state a little hard to get to with Highway 12 and everything, because, the wintertime, it ends up getting washed over some. And then, of course, when you get into hurricane season, it's a hit or miss as to when that part of the road's going to be open. Of course, you can take the ferry over there, but again, if you get there and the road's closed down, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's certainly, I love that area, especially you were talking about the pirates earlier. So much history over there along that section of North Carolina with Edward Teach or Blackbeard, whatever you want to call them, and the different pirates that worked their way through over there, and just even had hideouts, so to speak, right there along the coast. What would you say has been the most fascinating thing? Would A lot of folks kind of get caught up on Blackbeard, but there are some other pirates that you look at and go, man, how did this guy not get as well known as Blackbeard? Did you find anything like that in any of your research you've done?
I cannot remember any of their names off the top of my
Yeah,
head, but I think Edward Teach is my favorite. And
yeah,
I'm going to tell you
absolutely.
why. Um, my husband is descended from Teachies.
Oh,
And
nice.
so I'm fairly certain that there's got to be a connection there between the last name Teach and Teachy.
Gotta be.
Um, so I've tried to research that angle a lot. I have not done as much. What was his name? Wasn't there one named Kid?
Yes.
I haven't done as much research on all of those. I do know some of like Money Island, like these types of things. I know these kinds of stories, but
Right.
because of the connection with Teachy and Teach, I've spent more
Mhm.
time on Blackbeard than any of the
Sure.
others.
Of course. Yeah. I understand that completely. So I'm surely you've had plenty of guests on your podcast. What would you say is the one guest that and I hate to really say it this way, but I kind of have these same kind of thoughts when I'm bringing guests on. What would you say is the one guest you brought on and you thought, wow, this could be really interesting, or it could be just go a totally different direction, and you find out that's been one of your most favorite guests? Is there one that's jumped out for you on that aspect?
Yeah, and he's gonna kill me if he sees this, but my cousin-in-law Cody came on and we
Mhm.
talked about uh, rednecks, hillbillies, and white trash.
Mhm.
And we were talking about what those words mean to locals because you
Sure.
hear it all the time, especially online.
Yes.
Um, Other people will say hillbilly and they mean it in like this demeaning way. And for me,
Right.
I'm like, yeah, I'm a hillbilly. Like you could call me that all day. That is not offensive to me, you know?
Right. Right.
And we talked about these different things. And when we had that conversation, I was like, no one is going to listen to this. You know what I mean? But it's actually my most popular
It's
episode.
awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, certainly, if that was the title of it, it's definitely a catchy title to make you want to listen. You know, uh, but yeah, that's hilarious. Uh, what would you say has been? So I always like to ask this question twofold of all my guests. One, the first part of it is what's been your most adverse moment that you've ever dealt with? Doesn't even have to be about your podcast. It could just be about life in general. What would you say would that would be?
So I have to go with Twitter here because I'm one of those people where like I'm not shy about who I am. I am who I am, good
Yeah.
and bad, and I don't hide it. And
Right.
everybody's not going to agree with me.
Sure.
And so I've had a couple of different posts that kind of brought a lot of flack my way. One of them was about barbecue, and I said, you know, dear world, barbecue is pork. Thank you, North
Yes.
Carolina.
Yes.
And I write about North Carolina from a North Carolina perspective, and I don't expect everyone to understand that or to respect it or get it. But people from the Midwest and Texas like came after me. I mean, weeks later, I
Right.
found like whole threads that were just bashing me as a human
My
being, and it's
gosh.
hard not to let something like that get to
Sure.
you. Like that
Yeah.
really bothered me. And then the most recent one was, you know, the change of Fort Bragg to Fort Liberty.
Yes.
A lot of locals don't support that. I don't support that. My husband's family doesn't support that. Like I said, my husband's family's from here.
Right.
They actually lived on what is today Fort Bragg.
Mhm.
They donated and sold land for the creation of Fort Bragg. You know, people, I have family who've gone and trained there, who were stationed there. You know, it's more than just a name. And I feel like other people need to be understanding of that, and how we feel about it. And I'm never ugly, you know what I mean? But if you get ugly with me, I'll be ugly back. And I did
Right.
have a few people who did not handle that very well. And I'm like, look, you can't expect that the way you see things is the way that everyone else sees
Right.
things. It's never going to work that way. You know, we need to be respectful of each other. And this is how a great majority of North Carolinians with ties to Fort Bragg feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly understand that. I've obviously from doing, the main focus, obviously, as you see from the logo behind me, is weather. But, we talk about sports here. We talk about all kinds of things, especially things that involve the state. And we're coming up on almost 760 days here in Rowan County of no snowfall. And when you go
Wow.
out, yeah, when you go out to the eastern part of the state, you don't really think about that kind of stuff, right? Because you get snow, and you may have gotten snow more recently than we have, but it's
Well, if it's
interesting.
been that long, maybe
Yeah,
we had snow 2 or 3 years ago, and I got enough to make snow cream. I was a
yeah,
happy girl.
yeah, absolutely. Well, so this will be the second straight year in a row, unless something crazy happens that we're just not forecasting at this point before the end of this winter, where there will be zero snowfall in this area. And that has become a bigger deal than I thought it would be. uh, we've got folks, that are just straight up taking it out on meteorologists and everything else, and going after family members of meteorologists and all that, as if we are responsible for making it snow. And I wish we were, because I'd probably make it snow more often than not. Just because I'm not a real fan of when it gets into the 80s and 90s and even the hundreds. I'd much rather be a little bit cooler. So I understand the adverse side of it, especially with folks coming at you on social media. As I mentioned, though, I did, from what I've seen of you, you handle it with grace, and you take it to the point of if you can only go so far with me before I'm going to strike back, but even then, you still handle it with grace. What would you say has been your proudest moment in life? And again, it doesn't have to be your podcast; it can just be anything.
Oh, that's my kids,
Yeah,
without a
absolutely.
doubt.
Yeah.
I'm a stay-at-home mom. I
Mhm.
homeschooled my daughters. My oldest just blows my mind. Like, she went straight out of high school. She took a year off to try to figure out what she wanted to do. She decided she wanted to go into the dental field. She got her DA1 right off the bat, immediately got a job, goes to work every day, no complaints. Like, she just, wow. At that age, I was more interested in having fun. And
Yep.
nope, she's figuring out how to save her money, how to get the life that she wants. She's very driven. And I
Awesome.
know that's not all me, but I take pride in that.
Yeah.
My kids, that's my greatest accomplishment by far.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer too. So what's your next step? Have you got your next episode booked yet? What, if so, what is it?
So I don't know yet. I
Okay.
am gonna do the column with Carolina Journal. I'm
Yeah,
looking forward to that. I need to figure out how to balance a little bit better right now, because right now, like, sometimes I work all day, every
sure.
day for weeks on end. I need to figure out how to manage that a little bit better. And after that, I think I'm going to start getting into some video content. I started playing with TikTok a little bit, started
Mhm.
doing some pronunciation videos.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, I think that's going to be next. I always travel, not during the winter. I like the snow. It's pretty. I want to eat snow cream. I want to see it, but I don't like the cold weather. So I don't travel unless it's warm outside. But from probably about March, the end of March, through to about early November, usually I do my traveling then. And so I'll probably be making some videos and stuff of that too.
That's cool. Yeah, I saw your video the other day where one of your followers asked you to pronounce this word, Topsail.
Yeah, it's topsail. And I
Right?
got a lot of people started saying, "How do you say this? How do you say this?" And
Mhm.
I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'll start a list." And so I've
Yeah,
got a big list, and I'm going to try
nice.
to hit all those up. And then people started asking about other things too, about like, a lot of people don't know this in coastal North Carolina or in eastern North Carolina, people say y'all.
Yep,
In western North Carolina, in the high country, people say yuns. It's completely
yep,
different. They mean the same thing, but like when I go home to the mountains, I don't walk up to my, cousins and say y'all, it's yuns.
right. Yeah, and it's funny, you mentioned that, especially with the high country, then you get just across the border in Virginia, and all of a sudden it's a you all.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I have so my great grandmother grew up right there in like well, she didn't grow up there. She ended up living there, but Galax and Hillsville, right in that area. And it drove me nuts. They all say you all.
Yeah, that don't roll off the tongue
Right.
quite as sweet, does it?
Absolutely. All right, so another I want to go on another what could be controversial question here for North Carolina. So I'm sure without question you eat tomato sandwiches. And
Oh,
if
absolutely.
yeah, so Duke's mayonnaise or Hellman's?
Dukes.
Yeah.
Is that really a question? Really? Dukes. I don't,
Ironically enough, it has somehow become one.
that is weird. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I don't think I have ever seen any other kind of mayonnaise in anyone's refrigerator that I
right.
know, unless they're
Yeah,
not from here. And
right.
that might be different. But yeah, my mama, my daddy, everybody uses Dukes.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, it's hilarious because I've seen that come up over the last couple of years, and I'm like, how did that ever become a thing?
Yeah, that's weird. How about this? What kind of flour do you use?
What kind of flour? Well, so we go a little generic here. We just use food line.
Do you? Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I have to have my white lily.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
I have to have my white lily. If I'm making biscuits, I have to
Yeah.
have white lily. My husband made the mistake of bringing home generic flour one day. And I was
Yeah.
like, no, no, you can go right back to the store.
Yeah, we now I will say that my mom and grandmother certainly that's all they ever used was white lily. So that's interesting. But me is because I do most of the grocery shopping in our home, I've got a little bit more time on my hands than my wife does. My wife's a teacher, and as crazy as it sounds, they literally do work all day long. So
Mm.
So I ended up doing a lot of the grocery shopping, and I'll just reach over and go, oh, let me just grab that. That looks cheaper, and I'll take it.
Now with all purpose, I don't mind.
Yeah.
If like that's fine. But if I need self-rising, yeah, I need my white lily.
Yeah, that's good to know. I like to make biscuits, homemade biscuits every now and then. So maybe I need to check that out and go with the white lily and see if there's a difference in my biscuits.
Yeah, you should check it out. I'm telling you,
Yeah.
it's my secret. That and buttermilk and real lard.
Yeah.
I get so confused when I hear people make biscuits with other things. I'm like, what are you doing? That's not how it's done.
Definitely. So a couple more questions before we wrap up. So you obviously have traveled all over the state, especially from just moving from one location to another. Not that you've moved a lot, but you've certainly moved enough to be able to embrace really every part of the state.
Yeah.
What would you say if someone said to you, all right, we get to leave for the day and go to your most favorite spot in the entire state of North Carolina, what would that spot be?
Oh, the mountains,
Yeah.
without a doubt. My
It-
favorite place is probably Bryson City, which is a little
yeah.
weird because I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Canton. Canton has my heart, and there are
Sure.
parts of Canton that I
Yeah.
adore, but I love everything about Bryson City, everything. And I have roots there. That's where my mama's family was from, was Swain
Yeah.
County. And so usually when I go home, we spend time in Canton, but I usually stay in Bryson City or in Deep Creek,
Yeah.
and we kind of explore from there.
Yeah, that is a great place. Actually, it's kind of funny. That's one of the when I start to pull up any of the resort cams around the state, that's one of the first ones I pull up is Bryson City, right there where the train is and everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Have you ever been to a part of the state? And again, not putting you on the spot here, and certainly, hopefully nobody gets too irritated about it. But you ever been to a part of the state where you went, "Wow, I can't believe that's even in North Carolina"?
Yes, I have. And don't kill me, y'all. I'm
Yeah,
just gonna be honest.
it's all good.
Asheville.
Yeah,
Asheville has changed
it has
dramatically from the
dramatically. Yes.
time that I was a kid. When I was a kid, it was basically like every other Western North Carolina town. It was very, very, it was hillbilly. That's who lived there, and now it is not. And the culture there has completely disappeared. It's completely been ruined. And I mean, that's another good reason that I do what I do is because, North Carolina culture is important. It needs to be protected, it needs to be preserved. People need to understand what is happening is causing our culture to die out. And we need to figure out a way to remedy that before it's gone.
One of the and I'm in agreement with you with Asheville and my biggest complaint about Asheville. I agree with everything you just said, but that 20 years ago you could go to Asheville and find a place to park. You cannot find a place to park when you get there now. And I'm like, what is the point of coming here when you get here? You can't even get out of your car to go enjoy anything that's
Yeah.
left. So,
Well, for me, it's and because I have ties,
right.
from Buncombe County all the way
Sure.
to Cherokee County.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, a lot of my family members forced to move out into other areas because of the rising property taxes and cost
Sure.
of living.
Yeah.
Then there's, things like I grew up clogging. My papa
Yeah.
clogged. That whole scene has basically disappeared in
Yeah.
Asheville. It's been replaced. Anything that is hillbilly culture there is at this point fake. It's not even real.
Right.
It's kind of a bastardized version of it. And so that for somebody who actually grew up around the area and loved it there, that's heartbreaking.
Definitely. So just thinking about the different things that happen up in Western North Carolina, did you ever go to the Folk Moot Festival?
Of course, I have been to
Yeah.
the Folk Festival. My favorite festival in Western North Carolina no longer exists. It was
Right.
Belshare. It was Music
Yes.
Festival in Asheville. It was
Yes.
my favorite. My daddy took me every year. Yeah, it's really sad that that's gone.
Yeah. No, I totally forgot about that. That was an awesome thing to go to. A lot of folks don't know about this, but it's become popular over the last couple of years. Max Patch. Did you ever get out to Max Patch when you were up that way?
Yes, I have been to Max Patch. I have been actually probably to most of the most famous sites in
Yeah.
Western North Carolina.
Yeah.
My dad was very good at taking me to all of the places that were, Cataloochee to
Yes.
Cades Cove, which Cades Cove is actually across the line in Tennessee.
Yeah, it
But
is.
at one point it was North Carolina.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I got to go see all of those things. And then with my grandparents, I got to learn a lot of the history and stuff. I knew my great papa. And so he was always telling me stories about when he was a kid and when he was growing up. He was born in the 1800s. So, um, yeah.
Yeah, so it's funny you just mentioned that. So at our church a couple of weeks ago, our associate pastor got up and he preached a sermon. And it was interesting because as he was talking about it, he talked about how, like 100, years from now, those of us that are alive right now, if you're lucky, your ancestors or relatives might have a picture of you on the wall, maybe with a plaque that has your name on it or something like that. But really nobody's going to remember you, and it's interesting because it's one of the things that I certainly appreciate about, your blog and your podcast and everything. And even what you just said just then is you spoke about your grandpa and how he was, alive back in the 1800s. I mean, think about that. We're talking about something that's closing in, depending on how late in the 1800s, but we're closing in on that 150-year mark. And it's good to hear that you're passing that heritage along even to your children, and hopefully they'll continue to do that with theirs as well, because that's one of the things that's interesting to see is, especially in genealogy, and I know you've seen this yourself, you go back and start looking at folks and you go, man, I have no idea who that is. And then you can't find anybody in your family that can tell you anything about them, even though they're part of your family tree.
Yep. I'm actually one of those people. My whole house is antiques that were handed down from my husband's family. There's pictures of my great grandparents. Um, I have some of my great great grandparents that I want to print out, and my children know who they are. I've told them.
Yeah.
And I've told them the stories that I know about them. I think that's kind of my Western North Carolina side coming out a
Mhm.
little bit.
Yeah.
Um, Everybody talks about storytelling in Western North Carolina, and don't get me wrong, the Jack stories are great, and those are certainly told. But when you actually grow up in that culture, you'll find that when your family gets together, they sit around and they tell you stories about when you were little and when they were little, and they tell you the stories that they heard from their grandpa. And so, like, when we have a big family get together with my hillbilly relatives, it always happens. There's a storytelling session, and it's not like we're going to story tell now. It's no, we're sitting around a fire. There's people drinking beer. There's kids running around, and we're all laughing and joking. And then somebody tells a story, and then somebody else tells a story, and then this can go on for a couple of hours,
Sure.
just us sitting around reminiscing. And so I try to make sure that I keep that alive for my kids because that's one of my favorite parts of my heritage. And
Right.
so I make sure my kids know who they're related to and who they're descended from.
Definitely. All right. So one last controversial question, and then I want to ask you about where folks can find your podcast and stuff in just a moment. But so I say controversial because again, if you're from North Carolina, obviously folks have their own idea of how these things should go, right? So you obviously have lived in Western North Carolina. You've lived in Eastern North Carolina. Depending on what part of the state you go to, there's different kinds of music that folks like. So you've been up there where there may be bluegrass and up in the mountains, right down to beach music out toward Wilmington and all that. For you overall, what's your favorite genre of music from the state?
So that is not controversial at all to me because I tell people all the time, if you get in my car, be prepared. My
Mhm.
iTunes has Tourette's. You're going to listen to everything from bluegrass to rap
Yes.
to beach music
Yep.
to rock to southern rock to classic rock, all of it.
There
Whatever, I
you go.
mean everything. So for me, I love all of it. I'm a huge
Awesome.
fan of bluegrass. I grew up clogging, so of
Mhm.
course I love that.
Sure.
Carolina Beach is the home of beach music.
Yep.
So, of course, I grew up around that. I know how to shag.
Yeah.
Yeah, just anything that comes out of North Carolina, I'm always proud of it. I even love
Definitely.
J. Cole. Like, whatever it is,
Yes.
I like music.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I'm the same way. And my wife kind of laughs at me because one minute you may hear something from the baby who's from Charlotte, and the very next song might be Luke Combs. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just it goes all those different directions. So Yeah, that's awesome. It's good to hear you're well rounded like that.
I do want to say I have a
Yes.
very special place in my heart for Randy Travis.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I grew up on Randy Travis. I can remember when the very first award ceremony where he won all of his awards. That was a big deal at my house. Like my daddy was big into Randy Travis. And so, yeah, he might be my favorite.
Yeah. Well, we always want to be connected to 1982, right?
Yep. There you go. And that's a great song.
It is. It's an awesome song. Absolutely. So where can folks find your podcast? I know you're on a couple of different platforms.
Okay, so you can find the blog at www.wherethedogwoodblooms.com.
Mhm.
There's also a link there for my latest podcast. And then you can find me, I believe, on every podcast platform. I'm available on Apple, Spotify. It's all under the name of Where the Dogwood Blooms.
That's awesome. So that's Cassie Clark. And I'm telling you, folks, if you haven't watched it yet, or well, not watched, but if you haven't listened to any of her podcasts or read her blogs, you'll certainly find something in there. If you're from North Carolina or you moved here and you just love the state, or maybe you just want to learn more about it, it is certainly something that you'll enjoy because the heritage and the history and everything that Cassie brings out is really awesome. And Cassie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.